All right, welcome everyone to our first edition of the NASEP Speaker Series. That's the North American Society for Early Phenomenology Speaker Series. And in this very first one, we have Professor James G. Hart. I don't have his description in front of me, and I didn't think to prep something, but I know Hart well. For a few years, we met in person at the Society for the Phenomenology of Religious Experience in Indiana a few years back. But we had been corresponding a bit before that because I got into this a few years before it was published in 2020. So this is his most recent big book, Hedwig Conrad-Martius's Ontological Phenomenology. It is also his dissertation from Chicago, 1972. And Thomas Prufer was on there, was Jim's main mentor. And then Paul Ricoeur joined later on, as I understand. So we're just really honored to have Jim. Let me say another couple things. Jim has also translated one of the Husserliana collected works, The Basic Problems of Phenomenology, and Jim's major work, and it's big. It's 2 volumes. Is called Who One Is, a Meontology of the I, which is really interesting. You know, there's a now I don't know how much I should laugh because I'm not sure how much it's a play on words with the meontology of the I, or how much it's inventing the new sense of something that might begin with what Paul Ricoeur calls semantic impertinence or bizarre predication, and therefore spark the humorous moment, but then may depart into simply creation, poiesis of a new sense of meontology, because meontology, the study of the ontology of non-being, you find this as well in the Finkian direction of Husserlian phenomenology as well. You know, the Kyoto school brings in with Shunyata this category, but in German idealism, das Nichts, the nothing, and the creatio ex nihilo, you know, nothing is fundamental, right, folks? So I mean, there's that, but then to understand the I, this central component of contemporary thought, you know, since modern thinking, since Descartes, you know, in terms of this, that's very interesting. So this proceeds through 2 very large volumes. Irena has a copy there. You can see they're very big. So that's very exciting. And yeah, so with this kind of work under him and so much more, and many interesting stories related to early phenomenology, which I'm hoping will also get to these anecdotes, like for instance the time that Jim went and met Eberhard Avila Lamont and went to a conference where Gerda Walther was there. That's a really interesting story. So I can't wait to hear that, Jim. But the way we'll do this today is Jim has prepared a bit to say about an important topic, a theme in early phenomenology, that is a sort of meaning to say. But I'll let Jim say that stuff. So that'll take like 15 minutes or so. He's going to read us a couple little excerpts from James and Husserl to see some of these influences there, and then we'll just open it up, because really this is like a live Q&A talk / interview. In other words, totally amorphous, exciting thing that should bring us to those pure levels of philosophical dialectic. So we'll go from ordinary dianoetic cognitive activity, you know, processing words and understanding meanings, to the pure noetic stuff. So I'll let you take it from here, Jim.
Randy, can I just ask when I should shut up? Because I'm an old man and I can go on and put you all to sleep. So how much time should I?
I think, like, you know, you'd said like 15-20 minutes, whatever that means, is totally cool. We're all professors of philosophy here, basically, so we're all adepts at putting people to sleep by not shutting up. So okay, we can listen.
Let me start off with saying what I think I'm doing. I'm calling it remarks, about the phenomenological movement, and then in particular the early phenomenological movement, the Munich-Göttingen circle. And then I wanted to have us to think about what for me, and I'm not an historian of ideas or cultural history, but I've been part of this movement now since about the late 60s, because I did a dissertation on one of the members. And it just strikes me as a unique moment in Western intellectual history that we have gathered together these remarkable thinkers and spurred on by Husserl. But then the point of and I have, you all know this little book of 770 pages, that this is full of shortcomings insofar, I mean, just obvious and inevitable shortcomings, because the movement has its antecedents. So that's one of the points I want to make with bringing in James. He mentions James, of course, but I want to, because it's what I want to focus on is this thing that James emphasizes. Somehow Husserl picks it up, and then it has a kind of embodiment today in a movement that's at least important for this household, because my wife's a psychotherapist, and she uses the method of focusing, which was sort of invented by Eugene Chenlin, with whom I was a student at Chicago a long time ago, 1968. No, 65, I started there, I think. Anyhow. So, and then I was going to make some comments on the, on those, and I've already said most of them, on Spiegelberg's book. And then I wanted to focus on some of the members, and I know a couple of them pretty well in terms of historical acquaintance, but I wanted to say something about where their interests lie in, say, regard metaphysics and philosophical theology, and politics, and the philosophy of society, and so forth. So I'll just, and that will be the first half, and it'll be quick, brief. But if I've got things wrong, and I doubtless have got some things wrong, I'll be grateful for you to say, no, Jim, that's wrong, you know. Well, I welcome that. Okay, then the second part would be this, following this idea from James to Husserl to Chenlin, which I think is especially fascinating. Okay. Then, okay, I'll be brief on the Spiegelberg, but I met Spiegelberg once or twice through Avi Lallemont, who was Conrad-Martius's editor and colleague in many ways, and he did an enormous amount of work, and they were very gracious to me. Delighted to see someone coming from the hinterlands of Chicago, and who. Was wanting to write a dissertation on this woman who very few people knew, especially in the philosophical world. And so I met, I'll tell you that story right now. So Avi Lallemont and his wife invited me several times for dinner, and at least one time Spiegelberg was there. And I felt very honored, and they were always so gracious as hosts and so forth. And I remember one time I was making, I don't know how I had the time to do this, but I was remembering that Conrad-Martius moved me in the direction of reading something of Reinach, Adolf Reinach, who was one of the, I think, among the Munich-Göttingen Kreis, perhaps the most important figure. He was closest to them, and I think he was also led seminars and so forth. It's marvelous stuff. And he came up with, in his book on the, I think it's called the Phenomenology des bürgerlichen Rechts, of the civil law volume, he came up with the, I'll just make this quick. He came up with the notion of, we might say, illocutionary acts, the speech act, and that was picked up. And I told Spiegelberg about this connection I was making between Reinach and what's his name, John Austin, who developed this theme of speech acts. And he said, "Well, you're too late, Jim." And then he mentioned Barry Smith and about 3 or 4 of the other people who I've come to call maybe sometimes the West Coasters, who have a robust analytic leaning, but it's just a fascinating coincidence. But he made the point that, Jim, if you're going to publish anything, you better get going right now, because those guys are already way into this. I said, okay, that's good. I don't have to do that. But that was a kind of a pleasant surprise, and I thought, well, that's. But if you don't, I mean, that's quite a coincidence. I think that they had worked out, or that Reinach had worked out the whole speech act theory quite early in the 20th century. Okay. Well, the other thing that I want to say about the phenomenological movement is a vague term. Because as I'll illustrate today, a lot of some of the basic theses of basic orientations, certainly in William James, precede the phenomenological movements, strictly speaking. So it's hard to say, and it's not, they're not the obvious thing that Brentano and Karl Stumpf and others preceded and were terribly important for Husserl. So we could do this, have an infinite regress practically, and obviously get back to Plato and Aristotle. But there are themes there and people working which are in advance of what we call the phenomenological movement. And then its turn in the 20th century. Of course, Spiegelberg had to stop writing this. And I forget when exactly he stopped, but I mean, a lot has happened, like the divide between the East and West Coast, and for example, Bob Sokolovsky isn't even mentioned in the volume. So it has its shortcomings, but they're necessary shortcomings. He didn't get to live forever, and so there's so it's obvious and not terribly important, but the fact is of the East Coast, West Coast, that there are serious differences that are quite similar to the differences between the Freiburger, the kind of phenomenology that comes out of the Freiburg, where Fink was, and Landgrebe as his disciples, of course, friends of Heidegger. And you have the tension as it emerges in Germany, paralleling somewhat the East Coast version, which is, most of us think it sort of centers around Sokolovsky, and then the West Coast, where any kind of, well, most kinds of transcendental phenomenology is suspect of a form of idealism, and that's a bad term, the way they understand it. Okay. Then, yeah, it's enough of that. Yeah, one of the things I was talking to Randy about is this, and these thinkers evolve. I mean, their thoughts develop. So that's the difficulty of capturing them. If you say this is the phenomenological movement, and where do you place Conrad-Martius? Well, as a matter of fact, towards the end of her life, she wrote an essay called Transcendental and Ontological Phenomenology, and she somewhat had what Augustine would call a retractatio, a rethinking of how the Munich Göttingen circle understood the transcendental reduction and what Husserl was up to. And in that essay, I don't think I'll go. I was going to go into it, but I don't want to talk that much. I recommend that essay because she reconsiders it, and it's a very nuanced essay. But it's also, as I say, it's an ecumenical effort to bring the ontological and transcendental phenomenologies together. And so it's, but that's, you see, that's a step beyond what would be captured, say, in the 1960s in writing about the early phenomenological movement, because she was already, in some sense, moving beyond the almost cliche versions of one another. Okay. Then the defining the phenomenological movement, you know, as the offspring of Husserl, of course, is this distortion. There were giants, and Max Scheler, of whom I'm particularly fond, is an extremely rich thinker. I'm not going to bring in some of the biographical details of Scheler's career and his life, which were pretty bumpy, to say the least. But he's enormously powerful thinker and an innovator. But one of my interests that where I first was drawn to Scheler, because he gave a rich phenomenological analysis of what we at the University of Chicago in those days called the phenomenology of religion. I spent my time at Chicago studying two people primarily, and from whom I gained the most, namely Michele Sciacca and Eugene Gendlin. Eliade, you probably don't know. Do you know who he is, Michele Sciacca? I see some heads nodding. Good. He is an undoubted genius and a fine novelist. Notre Dame translated his Forbidden Forest, and I can tell you a story about that briefly. My French has always been very weak, even as I presumed interested because of some French philosophers that I'm terribly interested now. But the last chapter of the book, I totally misunderstood. We spent a whole hour or two in his office discussing this novel, where all of his themes in his phenomenology, this kind of comparative phenomenology of religion, it's just the patterns, you know, that he saw there. But my French was so bad, I misunderstood the conclusion, and that's kind of painful, I'm sure, for any author of a novel. And he inscribed in my book, and I, you know, kind of sheepishly exited from his office. I have that text now. I'd like to frame it. Quel honneur, like, so eine Lecture. No, I can't say the French. What an honor to have had such a reader. Your irony, you know, he could be terribly ironic, but he's basically, you know, being generous and kind and well, not generous, but benevolent and kind. And I really missed now the gist of the novel. And he cleverly, graciously said, "Good, Jim. Thanks for the struggle," basically, you know. So, okay. With Gendlin, yeah, I had also at Chicago. Well, I had lots of good teachers. I don't want to say they didn't, but Gendlin, I had courses in Sartre and Merleau-Ponty, and I got a whiff then of what he didn't have any books published then, except his experiencing the creation of meaning. And right there, we have kind of a gist of the theme that we want to talk about later. That experience is, as he means, it's preconceptual and in many ways pre-linguistic, but it's out of that experiencing that everything else derives, but to see him work that out through Sartre and Merleau-Ponty was a real blessing, and those are some cheap memories from Chicago. Okay. Now, all right. Now let's briefly talk about the Munich Göttingen Circle. Some more remarks. But one thing, and Randy knew already about it, they were a very lively bunch. They met regularly, and I think most often Reinach was there because he was with them in the seminars. I'm not sure about that. If anybody knows, I'd like to know that. But in any case, in posterity, and Randy is a keeper of posterity here for us, they had a Phenomenologen lead, a song that embodied the community and I don't know how many beers they had to have before they would sing the song. But I remember back when I was in Munich writing the dissertation in the late 60s, David Carr, whom I met there, I think maybe for the first time. I might have met him at a SPET meeting, I don't know, but I met him there. And it was a delightful, he was there and his wife, they rented an apartment. So we of course talked phenomenology, but just for this social evening, he sat down to the piano and played marvelously and sang with gusto the song of the phenomenologists, das Phenomenology, and it's a nice beer hall ring to it and song, but it captures some of the chief themes in phenomenology and puts them to music. So, but Randy says he has access to the lyrics, and what we all need. If we could get David, I know for sure he's still with us, right? I mean, I'm getting old. Half the people I look for in my telephone book don't exist anymore. Oh, they're not with us anymore. So, in any case, I think you as the future of the Phenomenologische Kreis, the circle of early phenomenology, it's incumbent on you to continue the tradition in a variety of ways, not merely drinking beer together, but singing the song and discussing basic issues in phenomenology. Okay. Yeah. All right. Now, well, say some observation about some of the members of the phenomenological, the early phenomenological circle, namely, first of all, what comes to mind is, of course, Conrad-Martius. Now, be mentioning her frequently since I know her writings and a little bit about her personality too. Well, yeah. So I have a kind of a close relationship of I don't know exactly. It's not a fictional, but it's not real. But it's partly by how I somehow hooked up with these women. Conrad-Martius, through my dissertation and through Tom Proofer and Francesca, his wife, they knew her well. They were really close. And so I learned a lot of biographical details from the Proofers about Conrad-Martius. When I got to Munich for the dissertation, she had already passed on. So it was just too late but there are all sorts of little stories I could share, but I won't right now. The other person is Edith Stein, Sister Benedict of the Cross, I think it is, or Sister Teresa of the Cross. I forget her name as a member of the Carmelites that she chose, and of course it was Edith Stein. She's a canonized saint. In the Catholic Church, I'm Catholic, and she's a canonized saint. And I've read these accounts of her being hauled off by the Nazis to concentration camps, and then eventually, and within a short space of time, to Auschwitz. And I've read accounts of how many people, people were amazed at her kindness, her gentleness, and while she was in the concentration camps, her main concern was taking care of everybody else. But there are a lot of other descriptions of her as a fine person, and that she it was part of the Nazi history. I don't like to think of what all the anti-Semitism going on now, and the kind of even from this kind of what we call national. Christian nationalism today. This is all very disturbing. But in any case, so I have a close feeling, empathic relationship with Edith Stein. And then comes Gerta Walter. The Proofers put me in touch with a close friend of both Conrad-Martius and Gerta Walter. And so they said, well, she's going to be at a conference. She, in her later years, and after doing lots of very good work, she in her later years then became a pioneer in founding a phenomenological version of parapsychology. She got very interested in parapsychology, and that's what Randy wants me to share with you. So where was it? It was further south. It was at my memory's so bad it'll come to me, but we're all separated. But there was a place down south, Starnberger See, which is they had an academy down there, something like a place for intellectuals to meet and discuss things. And I went down there and just to search her out. The place was mobbed, it was but it was kind of an odd gathering of people. They were from all over Europe, and they all had, not all, many of them had kind of their personality given in advance of their names, because they were either a count or a duke or this, that, or the other thing. And they had this kind of nobility, but they were all fascinated with parapsychology. And they were all students of parapsychology. But to make a long story short, a very enjoyable afternoon, I couldn't get a conversation with her. I wanted to hear about Conrad-Martius, but she was kind of hosting this, and she was, whenever we started talk philosophy or phenomenology, somebody would come up, and she drives, because it was her Count so and so or Princess so and so, and for all the nobility scattered throughout Europe. And so a conversation, we probably didn't speak together more than 3 minutes, because constantly people were coming, and it was the humorous, because she would, the guest or the person who so desperately wanted to speak was Goethe, said, "Oh, Goethe, ich habe ein D3 Erfahrung gestern Abend gehabt." I had a D3 experience last night. And then Goethe would start asking about the details, but they're all in terms of this code, what the specifics about the parapsychological experience. And so the phenomenology angle was to be able to work out all the distinctions. And so I was exposed to all this. It would have made a great skit if I was clever to write it all out. But so I got a sense of Goethe. I got a sense of her present passion, which was parapsychology. Did publish a journal, the Phenomenology Parapsychology, I think. I don't know what longevity it had. So anyhow, that's the story on Goethe Walter. So we never talked about mysticism, properly speaking. We didn't talk about Conrad-Martius or Husserl or anything. But I can say I met her and enjoyed her company. But it was somewhat disjointed and distracted. Okay, but this group, then what was the relationship to, were they centered by? Well, we know that with Conrad-Martius, there was an interest of metaphysics, and in fact, I recommend Matt that he look at design next time when he ready to write a second book, because that's a rich book, and it's kind of a dialogue, not with the PCL, the principle of PNC, with the principle of non-contradiction so much, but the whole issue arises about being, and there's some sorts of implicit interactions with Aristotle. Ada Stein and Metaphysics are two big fat books on eternal and finite being. And that's a grievance of mine, and that's why Matt's work is so welcome to me, that phenomenology's forgot, how for classical thought that metaphysics was basic. And in fact, there's almost like I was asking somebody who was a dean of some school of philosophy, and I asked him, told him I was interested in metaphysics these days, and that means for me right now, Louis Lavelle and Antonio Rosmini and Michele Sciacca. So these are names that nobody knows, but they're all metaphysicians. And but when I told him that he said, "Oh, I have no interest in metaphysics." And this was a guy, he had every reason to be interested in metaphysics if he knew what I thought it was, And so, in any case, Matt will retrieve that tradition. But her work on eternal and finite being and potency and act and probably other things, along with Conrad-Martius' book, certainly retrieves into the phenomenological movement and interest in metaphysics. But my thoughts too on this issue is that Husserl is now coming out, especially through volume 42, as very much interested in metaphysics. And I think this fat volume, I don't have it here, I don't pick it up. It's too heavy to pick up. It's about 500 pages, and it's loaded. Of course, it's loaded with metaphysics, and the theme of Conrad-Martius, the topic of Conrad-Martius, the concept of the entelechy, is given first-person status, rather than being confined to a philosophy of nature, and as Matt said, of organic being. Okay. They all had, I think most of them, but I'm not going to all of them, but there was a strain of philosophical theology in them, and obviously in Edith Stein's work, and it's fascinating stuff. I wrote an article on Edith Stein on the eternal and finite being. And of course, we all know Geert Waalder's Phenomenology, their Mystique, is a wonderful book. And it's I want to say something about this, that there is what you find, I think, in Geert Waalder and oh yeah, in Edith Stein's book on the spiritual theology of St. John of the Cross, something that I find in Louis Lavelle is that they, and this is the whole problem of say a religious philosophy, whether it be Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or what. And Bob Sokolowski would put it this way: it's certainly possible that we can have a genuine form of religious philosophy, but we have to acknowledge that it might not be everybody's cup of tea. But he just gave this kind of argument that obviously for the religious person, new areas of being and new areas of reflection open up that for the individual person might be terribly important. And so if they're going to enter into that phenomenologically or philosophically, it's going to have to be through a kind of clever move. And that's, of course, in the philosophy, you have the whole dispute on the existence of God. That becomes, but that's such a minimal, but obviously basic topic where someone can become a religious philosopher and philosophical, and not contaminate the philosophical work with a disguised theology. It's not easy to do, but I think that's what's interesting. Say in Lavelle, and then I'll say Edith Stein, that metaphysics is going to have to be reflect what the mystical experience says. And I'm thinking now that some of much of, say, Meister Eckhart, but certainly John of the Cross, there's a kind of, if I could put it this way, a crypto phenomenology and metaphysics of spiritual being, of personal being, which the student of the mystic or the mystic philosopher can gain access to, and that will provoke a new and different kind of analysis of what the soul is, or what spirit is, and so forth. And some of these writings, I was reading the other day, Edith Stein's book on the John of the Cross. It's very interesting to see her digging into the Dark Night of the Soul and the other books of John of the Cross with her phenomenological lens. And so I don't think it should be so easily dismissed as it is today. So, and Lavelle does that too in his writings, in fact. But he's written on holiness and it offers analysis of John of the Cross, Teresa, St. Francis of Assisi, and so forth. Okay. What else want to say about that? I think I mentioned already, and yeah, but Conrad-Martius' book on that sign is really very brief, but it's neglected, and I think it's really rich in metaphysics. The conclusion of the book is kind of an interesting synthesis of Heideggerian themes and her themes, and I recommend that heartily. The other thing they all, and I know this already, is that they all had an interest in politics and social philosophy. Stein wrote a book on the state. She wrote a book on women, and she wrote a book on empathy. And don't forget, when say on women, they couldn't get jobs at a German university because they were women. And that's a famous story with Conrad-Martius winning this prize for her critique of positivism. It was a university-wide contest, and when they found out it was a woman, they didn't know what to do. But she got the prize, but there was some discomfort, that they had to give this their highest award to a woman.
And that one got international headlines.
Did it? I didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, not all like so, not all so terrific, right? But a lot of it was really great, and it got to share her name and her kind of work.
No. I just want to say about the political side of this. Ada Stein, of course, is given her situation as a Jew, convert to Christianity, Catholicism, the Catholic version of Christianity, was the cause of her death, basically. And but Conrad-Martius was Jewish. That was her legacy. But she converted to an evangelical form of Christianity, and it's because of that she kept her profile low. She was known as the Obstfrau in the neighborhood of a very rural area of southern Bavaria, and she and her husband survived on the apples and any other vegetables that they were able to keep without probably any electricity or anything, and they would sell their stuff on the road, literally on the road with their stand. But she was able to live through the war by living a very secretive life, and she wrote then the Utopian Menschenzuchtung, which is a critique in a way of social Darwinism. Well, not in a way, it's a critique of social Darwinism, and the kind of movement was afoot back then in Germany, but it's still afoot, I think, as the go-to, the preferred form of secularism, of a form of progressivism based on Darwin, but it was also a moral progressivism, and Zuchtung was how you raise a dog, or you train it. Well, the goal of, say, the Third Reich was to train people, to be able to advance to their true humanity, because this is the call of nature, and where it was our destiny and our vocation, to follow not exactly impulse, but the march into the future with all the best hopes that we could imagine possible, but it didn't seem to need any virtue. It was automatic, and if we were just in tune with the zeitgeist. And there was a lot in Nazism. That theme was pretty abundant. Okay. Well, I guess that's enough of that. Have you had enough? You're going to sleep? because the second part here, we don't have to do this. We could just start talking about this, and I'll be willing to be corrected on anything. But I was going to talk about something else now, which is to see the phenomenology through history, and how kind of history of ideas through William James and Husserl and Eugene Gendlin. A basic idea that comes out of James, first of all, but somehow that's an interesting story there. Whether there was the reason the logical investigation was never translated. One publisher wanted it in English, and so they consulted James, and he said, "Oh, that's all logic, and it's dry as toast or whatever, or sand, eating sand." And he couldn't get up any enthusiasm for the logical investigations. But the question but Husserl did read William James. And I'll just make this point, that there are three very rich concepts that are Husserlian, and I don't know what the right verb is, whether that Husserl appropriated them, borrowed them, or breathed them in. I'm not sure. That were in James and were very important for subsequent Husserlian discussions. And one is what James says in the Principles of Psychology, that a good part of this work is devoted to the rehabilitation of the implicit. And he has marvelous discussions. We'll see maybe, and that leads then to the basic theme that Husserl picks up, that I wanted to talk about. We don't have to do it though, and then which Gendlin picks up on. But the other themes in William James that are important for Husserl. So that was the theme of the fringes. He mentions that explicitly. But another theme was so we have the issue of the fringes. We have another issue then of this theme of the wanting to say, the meaning to say. That's in the Husserliana. I forget the volume numbers, 20, I guess. Yeah, 20 volume 1 and 20 volume 2, in which Husserl comes up with a basic topic of the relationship of speaking and thinking. And the exciting point there is the claim, which I think he shows pretty well, James does too, that we don't know what to think, we don't know how to think unless we are immersed in language. And now that is, that just brings in another story. Gendlin continues that theme, obviously, the richness of the implicit. But I thought I heard back when Gene didn't get. He had, when I knew him, he had on the tenure track in both psychology and in philosophy. I heard he didn't get tenured in philosophy, and I right away thought, because I knew the philosophy department somewhat. It was brilliant, and they had the years I were there, they had the superstars there. They had Elizabeth Anscombe and her husband, Peter Geach. So they were some of the brightest people in that other philosophy were there. And the department was suffused with Wittgenstein. And as you know, for Wittgenstein, language is important. In fact, you can't think or do anything without language analysis. And you do all your analysis on the basis of finished linguistic structures, and then you delve into metaphysics when you come up with the category of language games and what's beyond and what's underlies language games. That was about as close as the Wittgenstein has got to metaphysics, except in the Tractatus, you have some marvelous statements like, it's not how things are, but that things are. That's that comes up at the end of the Tractatus. But if it was the case with Gendlin, it was his position on the richness and for all of thinking of the level of experiencing and felt meanings, that was was the philosophy department, my guess is, didn't find that very interesting, and it didn't sound Wittgenstein. In fact, it made some of the basic claims of Wittgenstein not possible. But that's okay. Okay, where was I going with it? Well, yeah, I think I'll stop there.
The Dunkel Etwas.
Hmm?
The Dunkel Etwas.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. Do we want to? Do you want to hear that? Das Dunkle Etwas. I just
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
ein dunkles Etwas für euch. But I'd. How's your son doing? Is that all right? Is he? If he has any objections?
No, I think he's agreeing.
Okay, good. In any case, I wanted to take this theme, and that's a good shorthand for it, das dunkle Etwas, Husserl's expression, and take a theme that the third theme, not merely fringes, not merely what we call das dunkle Etwas in James, both of those, but the third theme is what's very important. That book volume just came out with my friend Ulrich Melle published. I think it's 3 volumes, isn't it? I gotta get that for you. Hold on. Yeah, that's it. It's 3 or 4 volumes that Ulrich edited, in Leuven, and the title is Studien der Strukturen des Bewusstseins. So it's studies in the structure of consciousness. That's obviously, and in there, it's not only is that right? Not only the whole issue of das dunkle Etwas, dunkles Etwas is another thing. But anyhow, there is also an analysis that I find terribly important, obviously, of freedom. That's not usually, it's hardly any discussed at all in phenomenological circles. But there, what Husserl brings freedom, the free act, down to a Latin phrase or a Latin word, that's fiat. And the fiat is a kind of passive active enactment of letting something happen. So there's a kind of activity, obviously, in the free act, but there's no cause involved. The cause is totally in the monad, in the human consciousness, or in the I. But James, describing the free act, found congenial the Latin term fiat, let it be. Not the Beatles, let it be, but it's different, let it be. Maybe the Beatles read William James at Husserl too, I don't know. But and this is what Husserl discusses at length in the Studien der Strukturen des Bewusstseins. And so those 3 very important topics, and I think the one on das dunkle Etwas as well as das fiat, these are new territory. This is not hardly discussed as far as I know. Apologize if I'm wrong. Hardly attended to in phenomenological literature. Important for me is that Louis Lavelle makes a lot out of that, not from coming at phenomenology, but from his own, standpoint. So anyhow, so the James connection is important for those 3 reasons. But I wanted to look at das dunkle Etwas, but we don't have to do this. We could do it some other day or something like that. I was everybody. So I'm happy to just chat, because if I were sitting there listening to me that long, my eyes would be glossed over, and I'd have to go pee, or I'd have to go to the icebox for something. So,
well, I'm really happy I didn't interrupt you. I mean, who am I to interrupt you? I think, but am I frozen? That's not good. Okay, I'm good. Okay.
I'm a little deaf. That's why I'm putting my ear.
Oh no, it's just it appears to me that I am freezing on my end. Hopefully it's okay. Okay. My internet, I have a bunch of kids playing video games.
Yeah,
We're all
the
immersed in
baby
their
sitting here.
free language experience in the virtual realm. Yeah, because I really appreciate these three themes. I feel like what in fact you are doing, Jim, is you're identifying a very rich area for future research, for research now.
Exactly.
And you know, an area that's opening up, especially given like the trends recently, in recent not only decades, but especially in recent years.
Right.
And even in recent months, things are coming out all the time in these areas of phenomenological metaphysics, and in the convergence of the philosophy of language and phenomenology in these particular areas that
Mhm.
also open up on phenomenological metaphysics in these important ways. So I really appreciate you know, you identifying this rich nexus for us. So I super appreciate that. Okay, and I do want to like open up part of the purpose of this, right, is to you know, loosely do a kind of Q&A sort of thing. And because of the high level stuff, this is advanced, you know, we have some very you know, technically skilled phenomenologists here amongst us,
Good.
metaphysicians, philosophers, mystics. Let's see, who else do we have? No, I'm just, you know, imagining that's these are capacities that we all have. So yeah, let's open it up. We can do the little raise hand function, or we can just jump on in. It's all cool. Or if you want to type into the chat as well, that's fine. Yeah, so maybe we can either build on these themes, or if anyone came because they have a burning question for Jim, or even just a question they want to get out there about like being and the infinite or something, you know, we could certainly pick up again the themes that Jim identified as we go. Okay, I'll start. Okay, I have a question. So I feel like in some of the things that you've worked on, Jim, like the castaneda or castaneda,
Fascinating. Mhm.
it gets a bit more of the like kind of philosophy of language and formal side, and certainly Husserl with his background in mathematics and the more formal ontological formal logical works goes into these more like these areas that work more with like potentially with philosophy of mathematics. And in particular, what I'm interested in is those foundations of mathematics that can be a great expression for the mystical, like the infinite. Like Leibniz was really interested in the one and the zero. Nicholas of Cusa, you know, a lot of these folks were really interested in that. Now, I know that's not exactly necessarily where you're going with this kind of metaphysics, but of course it's there. You know, it lurks on the like on the left side of the brain of all of these thoughts, right? The presence of the oneness of the transcendental ego, of the one of the Fichtean I, you know, etc., and the infinite that is maybe manifest in freedom and, you know, all over the place, right? And it could, you know, be that material of the prima materia. Anyway, maybe this is like too far afield, you know, or too like left brain, like, you know, the Mathesis Universalis aspect of this first philosophy that we're doing when we talk about being and nothingness and the infinite. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that stuff. I don't know if like you wanted to, Jim, like mention you know, how you think this might connect from your perspective, given your background in this soil.
Well,
Yeah.
Hector Neri Castaneda was a colleague, friend, a neighbor. I think he's one of the jewels of the phenomenological movement. He has an interesting story himself. He was a peasant from Nicaragua, I'm quite sure, and dirt poor, but he was shined in class, and he kept getting scholarships, and so he wound up getting a scholarship at the University of Minnesota to study with what's his name, Wilfrid Sellers, who has a lot of phenomenological moves. And he, I think, I'll get to the infinity in a minute, but why I was taken with his position, obviously, because it seemed perfectly evident to we use the first person singular as an indexical. We're not referring to ourselves with any relations, any properties. The father of Jenny, the person who loves Halvin, he eats too much fatty things, and all the things that describe me as in an intersubjective way are not the referent of when I say I. But I don't make a mistake when I don't say I. He says even the amnesiac can say I infallibly. And so this whole notion of the non-sortal character of first-person reference, because we are persons in the world with others, and we have a public identifiable referent when, say, we appear before a state license bureau, and you have to say who you are. You're applying for if you're applying for a scholarship, you have to say who you are in terms of properties and attributes, and that's how you are publicly. But things kind of get complicated, or things get changed when you start realizing that when you refer to yourself with I, you're not referring to your personal identity in the world with others. And Castaneda used the term non-sortal, meaning it's not a kind. You don't identify yourself by coming forth with kinds. I have funny stories about that. Well, I'll tell this one. But I have friends, twins, friends, they're old men now, but they both were having an affair with a woman, and they would sneak in on different times to visit this other friend, the woman, and but the woman only had a preference for one of them. And so when she would refer to you who visited me last night, she would certainly have in mind the person who had these attributes that she admired. And the other person didn't have those attributes. But supposing, and this is nicely developed by lots of philosophers I'm indebted to, the whole problem of doubles, of absolute doubles, if you have these kind of Star Wars situations where you want to get transported to somewhere else, as James G. Hart, but supposing there's someone else shows up as an absolute twin of James G. Hart, that's not a double, not twin, a double. That's not inconceivable to have in terms of appropriate properties. That's conceivable. But as a matter of fact, the two twins, when they would be, or the doubles, when they be facing one another, will be saying, whoever in the world you are, I am me and not you, and you're you and not me. That would be a sensible statement. There'd be a reference to oneself, that there's something about it. So non-sortal doesn't mean nothing absolutely, but it's the theme of the medievals had this discussion of aseity, a kind of thisness or thatness, but you couldn't bring forth any properties, descriptors to capture it. And I'll make a leap now. There's a passage, I think it's in Ephesians, obviously I'm Christian Catholic, And I think Ephesians 1:4, God has called you before the foundation of the world. I stole on that text often. Before, if all of our individuating features come from our being in the world with others, what could possibly be the referent view if it was bound up with being in the world with others? And I say that's what we refer to ourselves precisely that way. The first person singular referent in the indexical I we don't attach to ourselves any properties, any descriptions, personality traits or anything, but it's not nothing. So there's a unique kind of individuation there. And it's not able to be handled by my hand is causing me trouble here by a property description. And so I wrote 1,200 pages on this. So I think it's an interesting topic. And so, but now to go to the slip to infinity, I was going to make a connection with that and other bit. But in the phenomenology, we have interesting tools for capturing an experience of not in phenomenology, in human intercourse, for capturing the notion of infinity. And one is etc. We read the word, we say the word, and we put it, it's a bad infinity, if you want, in Hegel's sense. It's not the well-rounded infinity of actuality of infinity, but it's more and more and more and more. There's necessarily no silencing of that continuing and. In phenomenology, where that comes up a bit is in phenomenology perception. Husserl has important discussions of in terms of fringes, that they appear as of the perceptions as determinate, but as determinate always has it also has its fringe. How did the fringe appear? Well, it is bestimmbar. Bestimmbar, that's to say, it appears as determinable. And that means there has to be on our side the agency of making bestimmt, making determinate that which appears as determinable. And that's the important difference for Husserl is between unbestimmt and bestimmbar. Unbestimmt doesn't mean infinity at all, or the possibility of infinity at all. I mean, the Bestimmbarkeit, the determinability of Husserl's famous cube, or whatever it was, the tree, or whatever he's talking about, is that you have a grasp of it as having infinite Bestimmbarkeit, or a determinability, and that's not unbestimmt. If we say undetermined, so I know there's a lot more to be said about that, but this is, for me, a kind of tool for the horizon, in other words, that we experience. It's by definition unbestimmt, but it's loaded with, of necessity, Bestimmbarkeiten, determinabilities, and it's not indeterminate. Is that making sense at all? There's a sense of a kind of nascent sense of infinity tied to our reflection on the phenomenology perception. But there must be other kinds of notions of infinity. But there, I thought this is one.
Yeah, I believe in the Inner Time Consciousness lectures, he talks about this infinite continuity, double continuity. And I wonder if this might also connect. Just as a last, like a kind of follow up to what you're saying, Conrad-Martius has this category that she develops much later on, right, in Der Raum, of the apeirische Raumzeit Einheit, and this maybe develops in the context of like theoretical physics and the philosophy of space and time in that sort of context, but clearly the connections to like the phenomenology of inner time consciousness, the phenomenology of perception, and the phenomenological ontology of reality is very clear. And so by extending this insight, it's an interesting frame for viewing the nature of the finite and infinite in ordinary phenomena and extraordinary phenomena. So I wonder, just to like tag it for like the future research, if we can take Conrad-Martius's idea of the apeirisha realm site, which, she's using the Greek word for the infinite, and she is tying it to Anaximander and the pre-Socratics, Plato and Aristotle and so on. But clearly that's also the infinite, perhaps in a specific way in relation to the determinable and the limit.
Oh, yeah. Well, the as you know, she one of her theory of space is kind of revolutionary. She criticizes both Kant and Newton for space as this infinite container, infinite container, and for a long story short, what space is for her is not an infinite container, but if you think about making of the verb of the noun substantive space realm, as we can in English, make a verb of it. Spacing, we do it all the time on the computer, but no, but spacing in terms of Royman cleaning out your desk, making room for your life. Space is what actual beings, physical beings, do. In order to be, they create elbow room, and that is the condition for their being. And so space is to be understood as kind of a transcendental illusion, if we're thinking as we do in terms of Newtonian space, and our own, for her, would be the naivete, thinking that there is something called infinite space. No, it's there as a result of bodies, physical bodies, needing to establish the conditions for their being, and one of them is Riemann making room, and that means in order that they may expand, in order that they may be self-actuating, or they may do this, that, or the other thing, they have to do something to their environment in order for them to be. So every physical body is necessarily Riemann, it's necessarily space making, and it's and Kant, picking up on Newton, that went down the wrong way on that. It's I don't know if anybody's really picked up on that, but I think it's in some nuclear physics, you get a sense that there is a kind of agency.
Your and Professor Mella's conceptions of later Husserlian ethics. So is there anything that you would say you really disagree with him on that might be useful, or something that you think could be a point of similarity between you?
Thomas, can you do it once again? I'm kind of an old deaf fart here.
Of course, yes. So concerning Husserl's later theory of ethics, is specifically with regards to vocation and love. Because of course you and Professor Mella both work extensively on this topic. Are there disagreements that you have with Professor Mella's reading, or are you things you agree upon? Where do you think if someone were to work on your thought and Professor Mella's thought, where do you think would be interesting hot points to talk about? Because this is I've worked on some of these ideas, but I really was wondering if you had any suggestions for places to turn regarding your work or regarding Professor Mel's work that would
we
allow for
usually
full research.
you're going to have to help me, Thomas. I think and I want to hear from you because where I'm stumbling right now. I think that this notion of vocation, excuse me, in Husserl is central. It's where the divine entelechy is, as it were, addressing us. You know, this is an interesting point for my kind of angle. We're being called by our name, and this is from the get-go. It's not who we are is not yet a matter of individuation. From the get-go, we're being called. You know, do we have the issue of individuality? I don't know how much Husserl would agree with me on this, but there's no, I don't think, any string or litany of distinguishing properties that we have in this metaphysical sense of the call. Because it's from the get-go, like in Ephesians, from the start. And so there's a sense in which, again, what we refer to when we say I, rather than when my pride is offended, or, you know, I'm going to flex my muscles, or I'm going to boast of my deeds and so forth. Those are all me, the personal me, the intersubjective me, you know, and that depends on the public description of me, which everybody else can see, or at least have a sense of. But what I refer, it comes out, I think, in love, the connection with love. I'll jump in, but you're going to need some help from you, though. Is that I think right now, and you can change my mind, I think that what we refer to in the second person singular, you or thou, that we don't in a relationship of I think in any kind of what do we call that, invoking or calling as addressing someone, address, we refer to the other person, what they refer to when they say I. Now, I mean, the tautology here is because they don't say they don't refer to a property itself. What I refer to is not a property itself either, but something deeper. I'm calling it, with constellated self, non-sortal. But that doesn't mean vacuous. It doesn't mean, you know, it doesn't have any sense of individuality. But we have a whole new understanding of individuality, which we come across with the other when we address them as you. We're addressing what they refer to with I. Now, the tension that I immediately have, and that's why we need your help to make me revise my thoughts, or not revise my memory about what Ulrich and Husserl are up to with the relationship between the absolute ought and love, because obviously the ought seems to contradict the kind of is, kind of essential affirmation of love, but that's maybe just one form of love, and that might be, in other words, we might have I think with Levinas, I think that he you know, is strong on all this, but I'm wondering whether, but I think it's Lavelle too, that love is so basic. But in the Husserlian framework, I'm wondering, and you can help me, whether does it have a teleological kind of sense as the absolute ought does in terms of our calling, and its telos is love, or is love there early on, and whether it's a it's a grace that we're capable of, apparently, which goes in advance of having any assessment of the other person, you know, in terms of merits, or in terms of beauty, or in terms of this, that, or the other thing. And because there is, I do think that this is right, and I might be wrong, but the use of thou or you is always harkens back to the first person use, first person singular reference to ourselves. But here now it is in reference to another as she refers to herself or he refers to himself. So I said, is there, well, how do you see that with the relationship between the absolute ought as the expression of our vocation? Isn't that right? For Husserl, and as our in 42, and that seems to be what Kant would call deontological, and love would seem to be free of deontology. It's but not by being less in terms of its status as an ethical act, but higher than that.
That is a lot. I also have my dog here, so I'm sorry if it barks at me while I'm talking.
You didn't like what I was saying.
Like it.
What kind of dog do you have?
I have a rescue dog, a mutt.
Oh, what a sweetie. Oh.
So I think from what I understand, and this is also why I haven't read enough of the late Husserlian ethics. I'm right now working on Husserliana 28, the lectures on ethics and value theory. But from what I understand, the concepts of vocation and love are meant as a critique of this kind of formal scientific ethics. That you cannot create this kind of formal science because your ethic is always based around one, the vocation that you choose to structure your life around, and two, also the concept of love is a kind of thorn or something you stick in the wheel. It stops the wheel from turning. Husserl uses the example of a mother who has to choose between her love for her country and her love for her son. Well, it might be the right in the kind of scientific sense choice to choose love for country. Here she has this absolute obligation to her son, which doesn't make sense in kind of these formal science. And of course, that's obviously really relevant considering Husserl lost his son in the war. And he also does talk about this already in the Kaizo articles too.
I'm sorry, what is that?
The Kaizo lectures?
Oh, yes.
So that's also really interesting. And then I have one other question, just maybe for you or for anyone in the chat as well. Because I'm reading through Husserliana 28 right now, I'm having difficulty finding any descriptions of feeling acts. I'm only finding the technical discussion of axiology and the formal rules. Is there anywhere in that Husserliana that Husserl does engage in explicitly descriptive work of feeling acts? You don't have to answer that right now. Maybe someone can answer that in the chat, but that's just something that has been.
So I missed the last, a description of feeling acts?
Of feeling acts, yeah, the descriptive analysis of feeling acts rather than this kind of logical analysis of the different rules that govern ethics. But that's something that we can talk about later. And I also do want to mention that I'm interested in the dark something, as I have published a couple papers on Husserl's theory of dark intentions.
What?
Dark intentions. Yeah. So one of my shameless self-promotion. One of my papers is called "Smashing Husserl's Dark Mirror." So I'm very interested.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I have something to say, but I'll just say it quickly. One of those books that Ulrich edited, I forget the title of it, which one it is. There's a lot about feeling there, and
it's the second volume of the Studium text.
Yeah, well, and I don't think of it. I think you're putting your finger on something really basic. In what sense is axiology a genuine ethics? Because the kind of but both Husserl and well, certainly Shaler, the key move, as far as I can see, for the axiology in Shaler is the order of preference. But there's an intuitive, and it's not cognitive. It's the way our heart goes out to something. You know that if your dog is in the, you know, you're eating a great sandwich, but suddenly you see a truck barreling down on your dog, you know, you might risk your life for the dog, you know, and that might be from some point of view, and analytic philosophers could spell out, you know, why you're important for your country and why the hell with the dog and so forth and so on. But, you know, it just cannot, it cannot not be the case that we have the heart, das Gemüt, is in play in value perception. That's Husserl's position. So is that, and that's pretty amply handled in one of those volumes that Husserl, that Ulrich edited. But was that your question? Because that's pretty abundantly approximating Shaler, you know, and that one can ask, and I think this is really intriguing. Is there a Husserlian version of the Pascalian thesis? Does the heart have its reasons, which reason doesn't know? You know, and I think that's a key ethical, both philosophy of ethics question, because the heart. But I think he argues, you know, that for it's not a cognition-free thing, but it's a different kind of display of the world through emotions. The plus and minus, the affect, the values display of the world. It's not a matter of mathematics or logic. And that's I think he deals with that question.
That's very helpful. Thank you. That's exactly kind of what I was trying to get at. Thank you.
But I wanted to get back to the love thing. Is that's terribly important. I just don't know where the passage is. Maybe you can send it to me where love comes in for Husserl. I'm just drawing a blank, you know, in terms of how it would play into the question of vocation, as well as the question of axiology. So,
yeah, this is
I will send you an email later. Thank you. I really am very grateful
Great.
for all of your comments.
good.
I think related to this stuff. I think, Irena, did you have something you wanted to import, I think, into this discussion, probably?
Well, yes, I wrote it in the chat. Husserl speaks very clearly about the personal ought. In case of decision, the personal ought overweights the absolute ought. That depends on the values of love. They are personal values, and these acts that are based on love are objectifying acts, so they have a normative value. That is explicitly said in the Husserliana 43. Yes, because the problem Mele always found in this explanation, in this ethics reflections of Husserl, is that feelings and sentiments are not objectifying acts. That is, they are not the base for norms. They have no normative value. But Husserl realizes that when he comes to be confronted with experiences of the war, the absolute ought must be relativized to the personal values and to the personal feelings. And then he reframes his ethical theory on the base of, or taking into consideration, these personal values, which from that moment on have ethical value, and they are normative. They are the base for norms. So it's something that only I wanted to just simply add, but it was also implied in the conversation we already had.
I'm terribly sorry. I'm going to get my earplugs in. I don't hear well, and so this is where it shows up. And I apologize, but I'm going to get the earplugs in, and and see if I can hear better. I'll be right back.
This is, of course, like the most important point in philosophy, perhaps. I mean, like the theological foundation, or the common foundation of philosophy, in the sense of like metaphysics, ontology, having a foundation in the beyond being. This you could go in the theological direction, you can go in the strictly philosophical phenomenological direction, but the axiological science is severely underdeveloped. Hopefully maybe that we are at the beginning of having a bit more of like an intelligence about not just like formal structures, of thought, but of feelings and value, the motivations and the goals behind expression. Anyway, that's my thinking. I don't know what to contribute. But I could repeat, I think, what Irina was just saying. She was bringing up the personal ought, right?
Yes. Well, I get that much. That's terribly important, because the absolute ought is a personal ought, as far as I understand it. In other words, it might be in some circumstances, a common categorical imperative. Let's say, be part of being human. I mean, in most ethics, killing is not allowed as a response to one's goals or one's pleasures or so forth. There's a deep chasm there with a kind of utilitarian ethics, or a kind of axiology which would permit that. But the whole issue of, this is obvious, but the whole issue of a non-violent approach to the situations that are immersed in violence is controversial, because if you can prevent evil by exercising a kind of defensive posture that requires force, and as a result of that force, another human is killed, but not, this is the old, a discussion of just war or legitimate self-defense. You may not directly kill another. That's the oldest, one of the oldest common mandates or principles of all ethics. You may not directly kill another. And why? Because each is a kind of absolute. But when if that other person is going to kill you, you may defend yourself. But if that person is, going to drop a bomb on you, I mean, I don't want to get off on this, but I do think we haven't thought enough about some of the things we're talking about now in terms of our foreign policy and our nuclear weapon policy. Because if it's true, this is what, say, the Pope says, if it's intrinsically evil to use a nuclear weapon, then it's intrinsically evil to possess one and to develop one. And the reason is that what's the good that can come out of destroying humanity and all of nature? What possible good is there? But Irene, I'm terribly sorry, love. I didn't hear the gist of your question. I think
no, it was just a footnote. I wanted to tell that in Husserliana 42 and in 43, moreover, there are many reflections about the personal ought and because the problem Melle saw when he wrote all his essays about and his former essays on Husserl's ethics is that feeling acts are not objectifying acts. That is, they are not the base for the value ascription. So they remain on the level of feelings, but they are not. They cannot be the base or they cannot be on them. They cannot be founded any value at all. They have no axiological value. But then, confronted with the war in Husserliana 43 and 42, I think it's 42. He says that he has to revise his absolute ought and to relativize it by the personal ought. That is, the values of love overweigh those values which are founded in the personal ought. And this is the case you mentioned about the mother having to send his son to war and preferring him to stay at home. So then, on the basis of this personal ought, he begins developing, I would say, an analysis of acts, of feeling acts, and he ends by endowing them with normative value. So they are the base for norms. They have axiological value for themselves. They are objectifying. That's the really big difference with his former period, where sentiments were not objectifying acts and could not be the base for values, for ethical values. So it's just a footnote.
Well, I might have to study that. I'm grateful for your calling to my attention. I think when you use the phrase that comes out, say that book that Ulrich Melle edited, that it's a nice distinction between the way the feeling acts are or are not objectifying acts. And it seems, are you suggesting that when for them to become objectifying acts, there's a level of intellect brought in, which then has to be joined up with issues of evidence and issues of clarity and so forth. Whereas with the feeling acts, you know, this is cold, or this is hot, or this is warm, or this is pleasurable, and so forth. There is no objectifying act there, and to reduce the moral dimension of obligation to a feeling act would be a kind of I don't know, blasphemy, or it would disgrace. It would just be might be morally objectionable. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, I just have a question, if you agree, which is slightly different. Do we have time for it, or?
Yeah, you can ask another question for sure. We'll like pivot in a minute, you know, to make room for more other questions as well, different topics, but yeah, please.
I won't be long, don't worry. Just a question. I was interested in your book. You say that about Conrad-Martius. You mentioned in your book on page 37 that the question about Teilhabe, that it means participation, was not clearly developed by Conrad-Martius. And I found an interesting explanation by Klucksen, who says that it's not in Platonic ways which he defines Teilhabe, but more in Aquinas terms. That is the Teilhabe des Seienden am Akt des Seins, that is the participation of being in the act of being, that remits us to Aquinas. And I always had an interesting question in connection with Husserl on this regard, how the being comes into life. There is a phenomenological limit. I cannot say what happens before I enter into life. It's a dark area for Husserl. He says, I begin my transzendentales Leben Vorher ist nur Dunkelheit. But Conrad-Martius takes the step to go a step, I would say, backwards, and says there is an act of being which is which takes place, which from which this act, from this act, it emerges being. And I would like to perhaps you to expand on this subject, because it's quite a limit in Husserl, but it takes other dimensions at Conrad-Martius. I don't know if you have found any other reflections on the part of Husserl of this problem of entering into life, of entering on of beginning of the transcendental life. It's always for me a remaining question. Thank you.
Well, this has preoccupied me too. A great number of texts seem to suggest that the transcendental I, or the transcendental, or the monad, transcendental monad, doesn't die, or does it come to be? In both cases, there's a kind of undeveloped theory of spirit, or the ego. I mean, what I think, well, and just to run that by again, the Husserl's arguments for immortality have to have the other side. They're the problematizing birth, and but the argument for immortality is basically you'd have to have evidence for it, and you're being at a if you brought forth, like Freud would urge, your imaginative presencing of you being dead. There you are in the casket, and all your friends are gathered around talking about you, and that's easily imaginable. You've stopped, and there you are continuing as a subject of conversation. But in the first person, you don't witness, you don't make present your non-being. You cannot make present your non-being. That goes back to the issue of birth. You can't make present your having become, because all you make present is what is. And in the time conflict, I think this is neglected, like in the Bernauer, but there are other texts, but then in the C manuscripts too. There's so many texts that suggest that, again, the transcendental ego doesn't die, but nor is it in time. It's always in the present, so to speak. But that's Lavelle again makes a good case for that. But certainly that's Husserl's position. It's laden with it wants to be developed in terms of a theory of spirit, the transcendental I as a theory of spirit, as a spirit, and that isn't talked about. But it's understandably not talked about, because he said all he can about our not dying, or not being aware of our death, or being aware of our being born. We have to be aware of our non-being, because we have to be aware of our having been, our being now, and our being no longer. It's because how can we make present our no longer being? And so similar question about birth. And so some of the meontological texts suggest that the monad is immortal and has neither beginning or end. But you know all that. I'm just you had another question though about
No, thank you. I think you have answered, and it's Conrad-Martius who takes the step back and delves into a metaphysics of creation, yes, about the act of being, and he takes Aquinas. But it would be more like a phenomenological, phenomenological metaphysics. She gave some answers, and Fink in the sixth Cartesian meditation also refers to this entering into the transcendental life, but he leaves it in suspense. And it's only in Husserliana 43 that Husserl mentions very briefly that we awake from a dark and long sleep. And that's the only phrase which I found which gives some account of the moment of birth, of the passage between not being and being. But it always remains a question, because there are many others who develop a theory. Richier, Mac Richier, the French phenomenology, who develop really a metaphysics of coming into life, yes, a genesis of this. But it's quite another I would say, another way of thinking. Thank you very much. You have answered my question perfectly, and I would like to make space for the others to ask. Thank you very much.
I just want to mention that I've always thought that the problem of sleep is one of the big problems of Husserlian metaphysics, if there is such a thing.
Yeah.
Because and it sounds very much like Sciacca or some Vedantan position, you know, that I was very surprised to read in a very important, I think was the Vedantan text from the text of Upanishad, this dwelling on the state of consciousness of sleep and how it represents a kind of a state of grace, you know, because you enter into a kind of form of something like nothingness, which is not nothingness, but it's an infinite form of being, which is indeterminate, or is not in danger of determining the infinite.
Thank you very much.
I think that's all work that hasn't been done. You know, I think there's lots of fascinating themes that have never, you know, been had a good discussion. And
you mentioned an author, which I couldn't get it. You mentioned an author too about this question of dreams or sleep. Did you mention an author or someone who has written? Because I couldn't get it.
Oh, want my earplugs?
I need them too.
So I'm not only hard of hearing, I'm hard of speaking. I don't know if Louis Lavelle is somebody who's on my mind, so I probably mentioned him very often. But I don't know. I don't know how he stands. How he stands on sleep either right now. Somehow it's escaped me.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, I believe sleep is one of the limit phenomena that Husserl identifies in his move to this kind of more Finkian development as well of you know, reconstructive phenomenology or constructive phenomenology, which is the more metaphysical, if I'm getting it right. You know, it's one of those limit phenomena. It's interesting the way you talk about it, Jim, in reference to like certain Vedantic notions, like in the Upanishads, and like if you consider like there's for example, the tree of Samkhya in Samkhya in yoga, there's a shared metaphysical systematic tree where Prakriti and Purusha, these unevolved principles, you know, that are these like, you know, they're like theological categories, right? That one of them, Prakriti, becomes all the world in all of its unfolded, you know, fully developed or partially developed forms. And this is in like comparative religious studies, right? You know, this is common, or at least this urge to systematize these things, to categorize these, you find as well. Maybe this is similar to like the Sephira in Kabbalism, and so many other like metaphysical systematizations. You know, maybe there's a perennial philosophical urge to find commonality amongst these methods of diagramming, you know, the universal situation, right? And with Conrad-Martius, who maybe is a certain specific kind of you know, religious thinker, like she's Protestant, like by her tradition that she finds herself in, right? And then that's different from Edith Stein, who, you know, converts from you know, having a Jewish background to being like a, you know, common academic atheist to having the big conversion to Catholicism. You know, these are the specific religious situations of these folks. But then Conrad-Martius is invoking these Eastern philosophical terms. She's referring to certain Buddhist texts translated into German in her time. And she talks about the Vedantic notions of like the sleeping, dreaming Vishnu, and how this, she calls it the Weltmaya, right? You know, this world of like a functional illusion. She invokes these categories, right? So, I mean, it's not just like a Catholic theology, a Catholic expression of these metaphysical categories that animate her universal ontology, but you know, we could easily situate these things in the common project of discerning reality. You know, whether we're like Buddhists, whether we're coming from like the Kyoto school, like you know, form of phenomenological ontology. You know, anyway, I mean, I just wanted to like, I love these mystical themes, you know, that, you know, mysticism itself is a kind of common thing you can do independently of these traditions. But it's cool to see like Gerda Walther develop the Husserlian method into a straight up phenomenology of mysticism over here, you know, and that's so common to like already Conrad-Martius has this really powerful phenomenological method. I hope other people will come up with questions at this time. If not, I am curious to hear more about the specific real ontological reduction, the method of Conrad-Martius, because I feel personally, with my knowledge of it, that it's not only, you know, another method of phenomenology that Conrad-Martius is developing and applying in so many different disciplines, but it could even be extended to a general like meditation method or a way of a thought experiment that is maybe present in everything that we think. I mean, at the limit of it, it's kind of like a hypothetical method that we find in all of our speculative enterprises, even perhaps ordinary imagination, ordinary fantasy. You know, there could be like a real imagination or a real hypothetical method that we're employing and that she's just isolating from you know, the opposite, the reduction. This is a sort of like, I don't know, Jim, what do you think about like maybe you can tell us what the real ontological reduction is and see.
I don't quite know how to say about that, but I do have this sense that in this last, you know, essay on transcendental ontological phenomenology, that that the reduction, and this is, I'm pushing my own stuff on her maybe, but the reduction is not a doubt or it need not lessen. That was her major complaint. Her real ontology was that to see that reality has a particular kind of essential phenomenality. That there is, that the real thing for her appears in such a way that it's self-grounding, and from out of itself, it's before me, and insisting on being acknowledged. It's a kind of a aesthetics of the phenomenon of substantiality. It stands in itself from out of itself, and that's a matter of a phenomenon, of appearance, and that both the real ontology and the Erscheinungslehre indicate that there's something, and Husserl, for her, those writings, you know, didn't made it impossible through the reduction, her understanding of the reduction. But later on, it seems to me she's acknowledging that Husserl isn't, a Kantian, is not, in other words, the realm of phenomena or appearances are kind of doubtful or second class or don't have, and realism is a form of naivete and so forth. And she comes around to the position that, and this is where I'm kind of pushing my view on her, that in order for the reduction to happen, well, there has to be the prior experience of being there. You reduce from that initial engagement and participation in, absorption in. Now that can't be treated as a non-experience, she says. And she credits then the reduction with illuminating that experience from which we reduce in favor of giving a proper, and she agrees with Husserl on this. I think eventually there is that the transcendental is revealed. It's always concealed in our everyday naivete and our Alltäglichkeit and our being in the world. It's always there. The beingness of the world, but what we're blinded in our naivete through the agency of manifestation, without which we would not see anything or hear anything or touch anything. So there, and then, in other words, without the reduction, as she comes back to it now, has the double merit of restoring a kind of realism. Namely, we're always in being, in some sense, maybe Parmenidean sense. Something is, nothing is not. And but we're also seeing now that there is this fundamental character of being as always truthful or always manifest. That we don't have being apart from its manifestation. And so there's a logos in regard to the world, but that logos can't be different than the logos of transcendental subjectivity. And so there is this meeting of the opposites seemingly. And so I think that I'm leaning that way myself. So Husserl had to realize that in the reduction, he wasn't experiencing nothing, nor was he intoxicated, or nor are we, in an illusion. But it's such a powerful presence that we are unaware of the agency of manifestation, without which we have nothing. And so liberating the transcendental dimension as an agency of manifestation, not merely a priori categories, transcendental ideals, and so forth. But the transcendental reduction can have the function of illuminating the prior being of the world, which everything presupposes, but also the prior being of the manifestness of the truthfulness. The one, there's a medieval definition of truth by somebody called Hilary of Poitiers, I think his name was. And the transcendental true is precisely to be a revelation of being. And if being is transcendental, and say everything it is in some sense, but it's never without manifestation. And he makes it like that little volume, I think it's 36. It's some pretty interesting stuff going on in that volume. And I'll just say one more thing where I've got most excited about it. In some philosophers like Aquinas, the being is an act. And in Louis Lavelle, we have to realize that being is not merely it's a spectacle for us. It absorbs our attention and is an objective It's like being is not the world of objects, it's an act. And if that's so, then the meaning of being has to include that act by which it's manifest. And around page 70 of the 36, of volume 36, he makes the case that the consciousness of transcendental being is the logos, the source of being. And so there's that means then there is as Lavelle insists, that there's a prejudice towards thinking of being as a spectacle and not an act. But if we move in the transcendental direction, we see that we don't have being as a spectacle without the agency of manifestation. We have to practice some sort of reduction in order to not be naive about it. But on the other hand, the agency of manifestation is a manifestation of being. I'm rattling on here. I think that, and I think she productive soporific style. But I don't know how best to handle this problem of the love and the kind of ought and the is of love. And I have to find those passages back in 42 where he links if I got you right, Irene, he makes a connection between the absolute ought or the vocation and love. And how that's not, that we don't have the Kantian divide of the ought is.
Well, we ought to get going, I think, just to wrap things up. I wonder if there's any other things, for sure we should do this again. I think the idea with the speaker series is that we'll be doing this with other people, but we'd love to have you again, Jim. I think for this series,
I have the other really terrific available right here. Because I think this theme that runs from James through Husserl and Eugene Gendlin is worth pursuing, because it has lots of implications for a lot of the issues we're talking about, especially metaphysical ones.
Yeah.
I'd be delighted to come back. I'm so honored that you asked me to come, and I had a good time. Although I think I got talking stupidly after a while. And, I'm sorry to be late with my earplugs. You sound not only better, but more beautiful with the earplugs. And if you need to borrow mine, you're welcome to them.
Well, I definitely want to see things through your frames. Well, I might pick you up on that. Take you up on it.
Very good. Nice meeting everybody. Hope to see you.
Thank you so much.
My
James
pleasure.
G. Hart, everyone, thank you. And thanks for attending.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.